Alright, I'm going to talk through several castle topics in no particular order. First up is the common lines of damage. This is the trend of where damage normally gets dropped over the castle wall, and it's useful to know because it allows us to position more aggressively and also more safely. This concept, of course, exists in open world fights as well, which is why we spread out and take angles. But since castles are a little more structured, we can literally draw it out on a map, which I have done, and which you hopefully see on your screen right now. In case it wasn't obvious, knowing these lines means a couple things. If you're a support player, say a Locust or a Great Arcane looking over the wall, you can stay just outside of these lines while still being able to maintain vision over the wall. If you're a healer trying to get a risky drop off on your tanks over the wall, you can avoid these lines to get close enough in order to heal. If you're a bomber and you're trying to, get that cheeky weeping off during the enemy engage without getting caught, you can, kind of follow these lines, avoid them, and, be able to get in range. Of course, once people start to catch on, then you get into a little fun game of purposely going against the flow. You know that I know the common lines and I'm standing outside of them, which makes me predictable. And if I know that you know that I know, you get the picture. My assumption is that these lines mostly come from not being able to accurately target select over the wall, partially because there's just so many nameplates and there's kind of that height differential, so it's not as easy to see. And so people just kind of blindly shoot in the direction that they think they should be shooting. Which is fair enough, since you're mostly relying on your caller to, call targets and call directions at that point anyways. In case you didn't know, Albion has two different mechanics built into ZvZs, which really kind of define why large fights in Albion work the way that they do. I included the links to the wiki, though I'm not entirely sure if they're up to date because honestly the specifics don't really matter to me. But basically, there's something called AoE escalation and another thing called focus fire protection. AoE escalation just means that the more people you hit with an ability, the more damage you do up to a certain amount. Focus fire protection is the opposite, where the more people you get hit by, the less damage you take. Hopefully you already know if you do ZvZs regular, but in case you didn't, there you go. But yeah, basically what this means is that the more people that you can clump together and hit at the same time, the better. And sometimes for focus fire protection, it means that if you're a tank and you get chip damage from the entire enemy Zerg, you're not just going to instantly die. Bomb squads. So a bomb squad is essentially just a small group that operates outside of the normal Zerg cooldown rotation, right? So the Zerg is going to be engaging roughly every 30 seconds, 27 because everyone has omelets, and that's mostly determined by boot cooldown as well as a lot of the main E cooldowns are 30 seconds. And so the bomb squad is just someone that is not part of that rotation. There's a couple benefits to having a bomb squad. One is that since they're not bound to the regular Zerg's cooldown timer, they can strike at more opportune times that maybe the main Zerg isn't capable of. For instance, your Zerg engages and then the enemy counters, and you would like to counter their counter, but you might not have cooldowns up yet. So you gotta kind of wait a little bit. But the bomb squad does, however, and can now strike the enemy when they're exposed during their engage. Part of why bomb squads work is that small groups aren't considered as much of a threat, so it's a little easier to go under the radar and not everyone's going to react to 2 to 3 guys running in from the side. And, you're not as likely to have a full engage called on you, even though, to be honest, if your bomb squad's good enough, then the enemy should be full engaged on you. Another benefit to having a bomb squad is being able to keep the pressure up on the enemy even when the main Zerg isn't engaging. If the bomb squad is strong enough and coordinated enough, they might be able to even net kills. I mean, you'd hope they're netting kills, but even if they don't, they should be drawing out potentially important cooldowns, so like healer resets, maybe a locust drop, demon armors, things like that. In castles, bomb squads are particularly useful because they can be more versatile than a Zerg can. They can attack even though your Zerg seems to be out of range or is recovering from an attack. They can also attack from less conventional directions, so it's a little more obvious when 100 people rotate from the east gate to the courtyard, but if 10 people come, then they can, it's a little easier to sneak around, essentially. And it's also important to remember that it's often difficult to re-gear and defend a castle, so even a kill or two per bomb drop can be vital to success. Especially if you're doing smaller fights that are kind of in the middle of nowhere. I don't even know if people do small castle fights anymore. It always seems like the zone's cluster queued every time, but maybe that's just me. I don't know. So in case someone's watching this that doesn't already have a bomb squad in their guild, I should probably describe what a bomb squad looks like. Basically, you just need a couple DPS, preferably max spec players that have some sort of a brain, that are coordinating together to make sure that they hit the same location. Building on your bomb squad, you typically have beamers with them to maximize their damage output. Usually those are occults, so sometimes you can occult in to be able to add more of that surprise factor. You can go a step further and start adding other supports if you have enough confidence in your bomb squad. Like if you watch the clip from the end of the basic castle video, the BA bomb squad had an icicle staff that they dropped after they're engaged to make sure no one would be able to chase them down. As far as making sure your bomb squad is successful, that mostly depends on you and, getting enough practice in, having good enough players. But I can give some tips, in no particular order. 1, you obviously need to be in comms together. 2, have someone that can be your eyes, so like a tank or a melee DPS or someone that can either relay information or stream in Discord for you, some way that you can see what's going on without having to be actually in range. 3, attack when the enemy can't fight back. So for example, after their cooldowns are spent or if they're engaging in a different direction. 4, don't hit the same place. It's super easy in a castle fight if you are trying to bomb from the same direction every single time for the enemy supports to kind of catch on and start countering you. Number 5, when moving, be out of nameplate range so your movements can't be tracked as easily. Once you've been around long enough and people start to fear or respect to you, they'll learn your names and they'll be able to, they'll be looking to pick out your name within the sea of nameplates and then track your movements. Number 6 is hit fast and don't linger. You run in, you drop your damage, you get the fuck out. Don't try and hang around for kills. You're probably just going to get yourself killed. Number 7, if your guild/alliance has a high ZvZ debuff, consider putting your DPS, at least the DPS, into an unaffiliated guild. They'll still be able to be healed by party members, and it's a little risky, but getting that 30% damage debuff off is pretty big. And you'll see the big guilds have this. So Blue Army has, what is it called? Black Army. I think Shake has Vibes and Elevator. I'm not sure if PoE has one. Don't think Arch has one. Yeah, those are the only ones I know off the top of my head. I can't mention bomb squads in the current patch without talking about the Mistpiercer, the new Avalonian bow. This stupid thing not only does ridiculous amounts of damage, but also has a 30-meter range. A 30-meter range messes up the conventions we previously had with castles. The default is, of course, to try and demon armor it to reflect and kill the Mistpiercer player, but that's sometimes easier said than done when this thing has a larger than your screen range. Also keep in mind the just kind of nature of Albion and ZvZs is there's like a lot of lag, a lot of FPS drops. It's not always that easy to like even see the like what's going on. The main problem is that the castle safe spots are not safe to a 30-meter range, which you might be thinking, ha, good, there shouldn't be safe spots, but that's actually stupid. The offensive side will always have safety. They can always just back up farther. There's no like limit to how far away they can stand in order to be safe and heal back up. If the inside of the castle doesn't have safety, then there's no point to defending the castle. Just fight outside of it. Of course, no group is good enough yet that we're at the point of just give up defending the castle and fight outside, which is fair. The Mistpiercer just came out a little bit ago, and straight up castle fights aren't even all that common, with every like zone being cluster queued and whatnot. I did some range testing that I'm just going to let play without audio. The second clip is me confirming that it's at actually a 30-meter range because on the test server it was only 22 meters for a little while. And also realizing that Locust is a 15-meter range cast, so the diameter of my E is about the same range as a Mistpiercer. Conveniently, Magic Shock, or whatever the AoE Q is called, has a 24-meter diameter, which is equivalent to a whaling bow. Do keep in mind, though, that the explosive arrows on the W has an additional 5-meter range, so if someone gets hit at the tip, you can do a significant amount of damage, another extra 5 meters. Next up, of course, is the anti-bomb game. These are your support players acting a little more proactively to defend your Zerg. This could be having a Locust purge bomb squads or just entire engages, having a Great Arcane time stop the enemy, or having an Icicle freeze people in their tracks. It's pretty simple to do, really. You just stand up on the wall, try and be outside of the common lines of damage, and drop your E whenever someone gets a little too feisty down below you. Once you get a couple of drops in, things will naturally start to get interesting, especially if you fight the same group more than once. You'll start to learn the names of the enemy bomb squad, and it'll turn it into a little game of trying to counter each other. It becomes your job, if you're playing an anti-bomb, it becomes your job to keep track of the bomb squad and their movements so you can reposition in order to counter them. You'll know you're doing it right when the bomb squad becomes annoyed with you enough that they drop on just you to try and get rid of you. One big question in castles is how exactly you're supposed to push into the castle after you've broken the gate. The best option is situational, but here's a couple things that you can do. One, you can rush the gate. Have one of your tanks count down the gate's health and rush in as soon as it's down in an attempt to catch your enemy off guard. This is particularly good if your enemy is currently transitioning to the second floor or is otherwise unprepared to stop you. If the enemy, 2, If the enemy continues to hold the first floor after the door breaks, you can try and have your your tanks slash melee inch up through the gate first. Try not to clump too much, because the enemy will be waiting for particularly your clothies, to clump up in the choke, and will likely allow some of your tanks to filter through. Once your tanks are in position, try not to wait too long so they don't get poked down. You can push the choke while your tanks lock down the enemy. They can't catch you if they're all CC'd. 3. If the enemy has retreated to the chest room, the main threat is getting around that first corner so you can push out onto the first floor. Or push into the chest room if you're on the first floor already. Have your tanks push up first and be ready to throw CC over the wall. Your supports can also set up the chain locus on that choke to make sure you can get through. Have your tanks engage over the wall while your clothies dash through the choke, or even engage over the wall with your retreat leading you to the first floor. 4. If you have time, after you break one of the outer gates, those little gates on the outside, you can just go to the courtyard and break down that too. Walking in through the courtyard at that point should be pretty free. A risky maneuver you can perform is full pushing out of the castle. This can be a good way to catch your enemy off guard, but it's dangerous because you have to push out through the tiny outer gate. Even more dangerous is if your push doesn't work and you need to file back in through that door. If you notice that the entirety of the enemy tank line is on hammers, then there's really nothing stopping you from pushing out and overwhelming the enemy. A Zerg without tanks is no Zerg at all. Even if their hammers manage to switch off, they'll be on cooldown for long enough for you to do your damage. The other situation for when to use this is if you know you outnumber the enemy. You can push out and use the surprise to get to their backline and or start to surround them. And of course, if you have a flanking Zerg outside of the castle, then pushing out to engage in a fight is a good idea, but that's slightly out of the scope of this video. One big quote-unquote problem that shot callers run into is that whenever they call and engage, all of their DPS clump up on top of each other, leaving them extremely vulnerable to massive AoE escalation. But what people don't consider, and this blows my mind, is that it also makes it extremely easy to concentrate all of your defensives in one place. There is no reason, except for Judy's 50-second cooldown, that your engages are not covered by one of every defensive ability in your toolkit. When your DPS clump up against that wall, there should be a Judy armor down, a demon armor popped, a locust down, well, a locust on the way in and a locust on the way out, probably an enigmatic staff down, one of those maraca things if you have it. Take it a step farther, there should probably be a locust down over the wall as well, purging everyone, and an icicle over the wall to make sure no one counterclaps you. There should be 2 to 3 Fallons standing there waiting in case damage goes off. And the only way that someone dies in this is maybe the demon armor guy, and just pop a second demon armor. There you go. But it actually baffles me that people engage in a castle without defensives down on the ground. I don't understand how you guys, especially as DPS, how do you feel comfortable going up against that wall without all of these things under your feet? And in a castle fight, the only other time besides your engages that you should need defensives is on your tanks. And of course, assuming that any bomb squad's being handled, and most of these things are going to be too late to stop a bomb squad anyways, which leaves your tanks. And those, they're tanks. They don't need as much, right? Use their potions. They'll be fine. I don't know if this is even a tip, really, but something to keep in mind is that putting on a demolition hammer lowers your IP, which, if you are in a cluster queued zone, is a surefire way to get yourself clustered out, which makes attacking a castle in cluster queue really difficult. I don't really know what to do about that for you guys that actually have to do it. I play Locust. I don't put on the hammer. I'm playing support. Besides, I guess you can try and find, time it for when the queue updates and try and like make sure you have your weapon equipped and then run away and drop combat and then come back and get 20 seconds of hammering. But that's not always consistent because the queue updates before the like timer goes off, so you don't really have a surefire way of knowing. Yeah, just something to keep in mind. Maybe bring higher tier hammers. Make sure your hammers have the cluster roll. Yep. I should probably mention why we start at the outer gate. So part of it is that the those outer gates, the little gates on the sides, they um, they can only be attacked from one side. So like there's the gate, and on one side of the gate is the wall of the castle that no one can go inside, and on the other side is where the enemy is. So that makes it so you have a decent place for where your supports can be to help defend your hammers, as well as kind of limits where your enemies can attack from. Whereas you on offense have a little more variety because you can like move over to the courtyard and whatnot. Of course, the enemy can try and like flank you from the courtyard, but if you post a scout there, then not a big deal. The other reason that we start with the outer gates is that the courtyard gates just kind of suck ass. You can be attacked from literally every direction, including the other courtyard gate, which makes it super easy for the enemy to flank you. So courtyard gates are for one, if you just have way too many people or guilds that are not within the same alliance and you want to avoid friendly fire, or for after the outer gate is down so that you can access the first floor more easily. Oh, and also, if you're on one side of the castle, it's easier, it is more safe, I guess, for you to send like a couple flank hammers to bash the far gate, and the enemy won't be able to stop both of you as easily. Like they can't rotate engages on either gate, unless of course there are multiple groups within the castle. But that, is an entirely different thing. Oh boy. So Albion ZvZs have multiple levels of analysis. You have the individual level, or how well you personally play your weapon. Depending on your weapon, you may have a position within a team, even if your guild doesn't organize it as a team. I still see like healers and tanks and locusts as a team. Those teams make up the Zerg. These levels start to get really messy though once you add in the fourth layer, which is multiple groups. I say that because you start to end up in weird situations where like your Zerg tries to follow up on an ally engage, but then you misunderstood where they were, and all of a sudden you're surrounded on all sides, and no matter how good of an individual or a team, or even like your own Zerg, if you followed the calls, you're screwed. I would say I have the least experience with this layer because I haven't been in a real decision-making position at that level, but we'll see what we can do. When it comes to attacking the castle, one of the most straightforward things you can do is split into two groups and hit separate gates. Especially if you're not in the same alliance, this makes things super simple. If the defenders are solo, or at least only have one shot caller, this becomes basically impossible to deal with at the first floor level, and remains a pain when defending the chest and lord room. If the defenders also have two groups, they'll likely match your split, and you end up with essentially a standard castle fight, just the two sides are happening at the same time. If one side breaks through first, they can push in and threaten a flank on the other side, likely leading to them giving up the first floor more easily. In the chest room, depending on the size and situation, it might be more beneficial to wait until both doors break so you can push from both sides, or you could group up and push through one side that is broken, either way. Again, it really depends on what the situation is at that point. Another thing you can do with multiple groups is to rotate your engages. So you'd have two groups on the same side of the castle. The first group engages, the second group waits for the enemy's counter, and then engages onto that. It's kind of like the fake engage stuff we talked about in the first video, except the first one is a real engage. Theoretically, if you had several groups, you could engage over the wall every 10 seconds, or however it divides up, just to keep a constant pressure on the defenders, or the attackers for that matter, and make them scared to approach the wall. You need enough people that each of your engages is intimidating though. When defending the castle, you have some options as well. Basically, you want at least one group to match each gate that the enemy is attacking. If you have more groups than just that, you can start using your extra group to flank or to rotate engages. For flanking, it's a bit of risky business since it involves pushing out of the castle, which I hopefully put before this section, but can be also rewarding. Say the enemy is on the east little gate, you have one group defending the gate while the second goes up into the chest room, then out of the castle through one of the west gates. This group sneaks around behind and engages, while at the same time you push out of the castle from in front of them. Basically, it's a right position for the flanks because the enemy is soft locked into position. If they want the castle, they have to stand in front of the gate. Another aspect of these defender flanks is that even if it's spotted and you don't get the surprise attack, just the presence of the flank can be enough to draw the enemy out the gates. If they can avoid being caught, they can be a huge waste of time for the attackers. And anytime that the attackers come back to the gate, just threaten them with the flank. Since we're talking about flanks, I should probably mention one position that you never want to be in is where you're attacking and have pushed into the first floor or chest room, and then you get flanked from behind. Castles are tight chokes that are just big enough to provide small pockets of safety when, playing the castle the proper direction, but that is completely gone when you're flanked. You also don't have great options for getting out. So whenever you push into a castle, make sure your back is clear.